This is Bio 1520 Group 1, and our topic is the diabetic heart. Diabetes is a condition in which a person has high levels of glucose in the blood. There are two types of diabetes, and as we can see in the table right here, there are quite a few differences. But basically, type 1 is more of an autoimmune disease where the body attacks cells that produce insulin. And in type 2, the cells in the body don't respond correctly to insulin. A few risk factors for diabetes include obesity, genetics, hypertension, and high cholesterol. Diabetes affects all parts of the body, including the heart. High blood glucose causes fatty deposits in the blood vessels, and these deposits harden and clog blood vessels.
The body uses insulin to stimulate muscle, fat, and liver cells to uptake glucose. Higher concentrations of insulin and higher activity levels increase the uptake of glucose in the body. Insulin resistance, however, is caused by the overstimulation of insulin receptors, and it's caused by a high glucose and high fatty acid diet. It's kind of a hallmark in type 2 diabetes. In a normal body, as you can see in this diagram, fatty acids inhibit the breakdown of glucose, and glucose inhibits the oxidation of fatty acids to maintain homeostasis. So in a normal person, glucose in the blood causes insulin to be secreted by beta cells in the pancreas and bind to insulin receptors in the cells, and then that causes glucose to be uptaken by the cell, and cell respiration and glycolysis begins. In a diabetic person, however, this doesn't happen. Insulin receptors are overstimulated and not very sensitive to insulin, and they don't actually uptake the glucose at all. So the amount of fatty acids and glucose in the blood is out of control because of the insulin resistance. This cycle is, in this cycle, neither is broken down and they worsen each other. They create an excess of both in the blood. But the exact way in which fatty acids inhibit glycolysis is unknown, but the data shows that insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease are connected.
Continuing on from the previous slide, Ashley just talked about insulin resistance. And, well, insulin resistance is basically a condition where the cells fail to respond adequately to the circulating insulin. Since diabetes is also already a metabolic disorder which causes insulin to work improperly, this causes a lot of conditions for the body to try to fix. With all these abnormalities, the body reacts with increased blood glucose levels, and that's because the blood glucose can't be processed effectively and converted into energy. With all these factors, the body has high levels of blood sugar, and this causes damage to the blood vessels. And basically what hyperglycemia is high blood sugar, and the reason why that causes damage to the blood cells is because, well, it basically makes the blood vessels more prone to increased fatty buildup, and that's not the only aspect. There's a protein called fibrinogen, and it's responsible for clotting blood, and it's not regulated in a diabetic patient like as much as a regular patient. Therefore, it causes a lot of basically the blood becomes thick, and that leads to obesity and heart disease, just like all the damaged blood vessels. And the damaged blood vessels don't have to be necessarily near the heart. It can also be near the brain, which causes clotting near the brain, which causes stroke, and so on and so forth. And the main risk factors for heart disease and obesity, and in a diabetic patient, the main symptoms will be increased levels of triglycerides and low levels of HDL, and high blood pressure and high levels of blood glucose. And that's about it.
Atherosclerosis, defined as the hardening of arteries, causes two major types of problems. First, it may cause swelling and dilation of arteries to form aneurysms. Now, aneurysms can ultimately either rupture or bleed, and they may accumulate large amounts of blood clot and either block or send showers of tiny clots into small arteries downstream. Diabetes, by driven inflammation and slowing blood flow, drastically accelerates atherosclerosis. Action of the body's immune system to fatty buildup more than the buildup itself creates heart attack risk. Looking at this diagram right here, we see normal blood flow. Now we see plaque buildup. This plaque buildup creates attenuation of blood current and ultimately less blood flow to your arteries and other parts of your body. Immune cells mistake fatty deposits for intruders. The immune system subsequently attacks fatty cells and causes inflammations. The resulting inflammations make plaques more likely to swell and rupture. This rupture is bad, as this event could completely cut off blood flow. High glucose level increases the production of free radicals, which are highly reactive molecules that tear about sensitive cell components like DNA, causing premature cell death, or apoptosis. Atherosclerosis can limit the ability of the narrowed arteries to increase delivery to the blood and oxygen to tissues. During periods of increased oxygen demand, such as during exertion or complete obstruction of the artery by thrombosis, or embolus, can result in tissue necrosis. Now this is serious as it represents premature cell death and death in tissues.
Okay, so basically whether it's type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, the diabetic heart cannot metabolize glucose. So because of this, there's going to be a buildup of fatty acid everywhere. And this fatty acid is also going to inhibit insulin, which helps to metabolize glucose. So it's just a vicious cycle of not being able to metabolize glucose. So the situation is you can't metabolize glucose, but there's fatty acid everywhere. So what is the heart going to use as energy? It's going to use that fatty acid. So from the heart being dependent on energy from the fat, it's going to need more oxygen to metabolize that fat. And because it needs more oxygen, it's also going to accumulate more oxygen molecules that interfere with fuel consumption and encourage accumulation of fats in muscle cells, which can also lead to increased inflammation, cell death, and heart dysfunction. Also, because it's going to be more dependent on oxygen as well as fat, it's going to be more sensitive to drops in oxygen, which can occur with coronary artery blockages. And this also means the diabetics are going to be more prone to death with any kind of heart attack or stroke. And you can see this in my graphs here. The first one on the left shows how with no prior heart attack, in the gold right here, people without diabetes is around 5% of incidence with heart attacks. And then people without diabetes prior to heart attacks, their incident, I have another one, is around 20%. And then with diabetes, those statistics all rise. No prior heart attack, it rose about 10%, almost. And then prior to heart attacks, it rose about 25%. And then in this graph here on the right, you can see that people without diabetes, just their, if they had a heart attack, their death rate from the heart attack is lower than people with diabetes. The gold indicates in men, and the woman indicates the statistics, or the purple indicates the statistics with women.
So we've established that diabetes affects the breakdown and uptake of both glucose and fatty acids in the body. However, we have yet to describe the morphological changes that diabetes make on the heart. Some of the major changes include the hypertrophy of the left ventricle, increased heart mass, and buildup of triglycerides and lipids and other fibrous materials such as collagen. So here we actually have the results of an experiment in which heart tissues from the left ventricle were taken from both diabetic and non-diabetic patients. The blue data points here indicate the data from the diabetic patients, and the white data points indicate those from the non-diabetic patients. On the left, we have a graph that depicts the composition of the tissues and the percentages that include more glycerides and lipids and other products from glycation. And we can note that the diabetic positive patients actually have more of these products than those without diabetes. And then on the right, we have another graph, and this graph depicts that the concentration of collagen in diabetic patients, in the hearts of diabetic patients, will actually be greater than the concentration of collagen in non-diabetic patients. The next slide actually depicts the physical changes that occur to the heart. Here we see the actual buildup of fibers and the enlarged left ventricle. And so we've said that diabetes mainly affects the left ventricle of the heart, and that part of the heart is actually responsible for filling up with oxygenated blood and pumping it out to the rest of the body. So the changes that actually occur in the heart, the hypertrophy and the buildup of materials such as lipids and collagen, actually make the heart muscles stiffer, which decrease the volume of blood that can fill the heart. Over time, with diabetes, the amount of fatty acid buildup and collagen will only increase, which means that the volume of blood going into the left ventricle will only decrease. And when that happens, the blood will actually become backed up and go back towards the lungs. And over time, if this isn't treated in diabetic patients, this will make breathing very difficult for them. So basically, we have established that diabetes occurs with a number of other heart diseases, such as atherosclerosis and hypertension. And together, these diseases will lead to apoptosis and necrosis of many heart tissues, and that will eventually lead to the decrease of heart function and increase in heart failure.
As we can see, diabetes and heart disease are linked very closely. Although this presentation focused on the heart, diabetes is a condition which will eventually affect all parts of the body.